this is now the after show.
Yes.
So here we can just get completely unhinged with no structure and talk about whatever we want.
Yes, yes.
Not that we were very structured already, right? This is fun. So, what do you like? Do you believe in like a personal being of shaitan? Do you believe in demons? Like, how, in your mind, what's the spiritual world like?
You know, the Quran says that of everything we have created opposites. So you might know only God is one. So yes, there are these difficult forces, call it shaitan, call it evil, whatever it is. It is there by, the Quran suggests, by cosmic design of God. Like Rumi says, without a devil to test you, how would you be able to build your spiritual muscles of truth-telling, sincerity, graciousness, generosity? We need the devil to build our muscles. In the Quran, sometimes it's called the slinking whisperer. And Prophet Muhammad said the human being is, the Quran says, by the way, the human being is noble, pure. But the Quran says out of a cosmic design, God has put in every single human heart the slinking whisperer. So Prophet Muhammad was explaining this, that God has told him that every human being has the slinking whisper except for two people. Who are they? Who are they? Who are they? Is it you? No, no. Who are they? Jesus and Mary. So Prophet Muhammad said, neither Jesus, not Mary, peace be upon them, they did not have the slinking whisperer, which is by cosmic design. And the Quran says that. How about you, Muhammad? You had the slinking whisperer? Yes, yes, but don't worry, because I made the slinking whisperer a Muslim. Which means really, Muslim simply means one who is surrendered to God, who has surrendered the attachment to the ego. So as the Quran says, one can bring a heart turned in devotion to God. So yes, there is a slinking whisper, but we need that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's certainly from the Christian perspective, is part of like God's design.
Yes.
And I think I think what a lot of people miss, especially I think people who are very sort of simplistic in their religious thinking, is they think evil looks like a very sinister, menacing looking character, right? Think goat's legs, big muscular, red body, horns, and the way the Bible describes Satan is somebody who masquerades as a servant of an angel of light, is a messenger of light, and the name Lucifer literally means the shining one. So there's this idea that Satan was once something good, and he fell from that and became something that is still very beautiful, but a kind of corrupting influence, which again kind of like circles round to figuring out, okay, how do we know what good actually is, because evil always to some extent masquerades itself as good.
Right. See, in the Quran, the devil, or shaitan as you said, says in the Quran, it says to God, by your power, by your glory, it says to God, I shall waylay humanity. That's part of its task, to be able to do that. So the question is, like in all traditions, take the Native American tradition, we have two kinds of wolves inside of us, the good wolf and the bad wolf. And which is the one you're feeding the most?
Doctors know. There's two more wolves than anyone should have inside them. As your doctor, if you have wolves.
Yes. So which one are you feeding? So what are you more focused on? Goodness or, that where you go astray? That which you focus on more is what you become. And this is in every tradition. Like, in Buddhism, they say, you are what you think. Everything that you are arises with your thoughts. Rumi says, if your thought is a rose, you're a rose garden. If your thought is that of a thorn, you become fuel for the bath stove. So it depends on our thinking, on our environment, on all the influences we have over us. There's a verse in the Quran that says, when there's so much of anger, fear, hate, even helplessness, The Quran says it's not that the eyes become blind, the hearts become blind. When the hearts become blind, James, it's very difficult to open the heart. Because the truth is, I can use force, I can use reason, it won't work. In fact, the mystics say only that which comes from the heart can open another heart. Compassion, patience, love. Like what Jesus, peace be upon him, he preached. But very difficult for us human beings to practice that.
Yeah, that's one of the primary way Jesus speaks in, right? It's just talking about, blindness of heart, or it talks about having a heart of stone ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But biblically, it's such an important area, because there's a verse in Jeremiah that says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it?" Mm-hmm. So it's really, really, really difficult to get a good grasp of what's actually going on mm-hmm. in your own heart.
Yes.
And that's what's, I think, scary in my mind about spirituality, is that we have this tendency to be sort of, self-deceptive, and that's dangerous to all of us.
No, but the key here is that all of us have to do the work of purifying the heart. Just to say, consult your heart, that's wonderful, what the heart says is beautiful. It depends on the purity of my heart, on the level of my consciousness within me. If I have not done the inner work of transforming my ego, or purifying my heart, or opening my heart is not capable of telling me the truth, because there's so many different voices in my heart. There's a voice of Jesus in my heart, the voice of what is called the divine spark. Allah is in my heart. In the Quran it says Allah is outside of you and inside of you, also inside your heart. But inside my heart I also have my slinking whisperer. I have the voice of my wounded child, the voice of my rejected child, or adult, or adolescent. So I have so many voices. I've got to do the work of connecting with the real voice. That's not easy. And I can't judge you or somebody else how much work they have done. So I have a right to be, I don't want to say suspicious, but I can't be simplistic just because you say my heart tells me that I believe it.
Sure. There's got to be a skepticism. So okay, here's a juxtaposition here.
Yes.
So in Islam, or in traditional Sunni Islam, you have this idea of the fitra. That everyone's born in a state of purity of nature.
Yes.
And then it's external things that turn somebody into a Christian, a Jew, or a Sabian. And whereas Jesus says in Mark 7, nothing outside of a person makes a person unclean, but evil comes out from within the human heart, and that's where all of these evil things originate from. So classical Islam and Christian theology have this different point of original sin and sin nature versus fitra. How would you fall into one of those camps, or would you kind of harmonize both those statements, or would you have a completely different perspective?
The Quran says that Allah made the human being from water and clay, but also infused it with the divine breath. Mm-hmm. So fitra, in the sense that within me and within you, whether you're Christian or Jew, or it doesn't matter what your religion is, you're a human being. So regardless of your religion, culture, race, you also have within you the same divine spark. And I also have within me the slinking whisperer. And so yes, it's from within me. It can also be from outside me, influencing me, depending on the choices I make in my life. So I probably didn't understand your question, but tell me the question that you're asking in terms of what you want me to differentiate.
No, I think you answered it. Because I'm just kind of putting the kind of opposing points, over and against each other in the way people traditionally think about it. And it sounds like, so what I would believe, right, as a Christian, is that every single person, as the Bible says, is made in the image of God.
Right.
Which that probably about equivalent to what you're saying with, divine spark, but
Yes,
also has
yes.
a sin nature as well.
In Islam, it's not sin. It's just that that spirit is there to help you make choices. But the Quran says, because the divine spark is in you, you are noble, and you can rise even higher than the angels. It says that you can rise very high. You can also sink to the lowest of the lowest, depending of what use you make of the divine spark within you. You have, a divine trust. It's called the amanat. The ability to become more aware, to exercise free will. And God says, God gave this choice of higher awareness and free will to the heavens, to the mountains. They refused it, they were scared, but the human being took it. And the Quran says the human being was very foolish. It's very difficult. Because we have free will, we are prone to making wrong choices. Because of the lack of inner work, or because of an influence from the outside. And that's where we can go astray.
So, I guess thinking about it this way, if a baby is born,
Yes.
are they kind of like, do you see this somebody as sort of like who's kind of on the right track as long as everything goes well? Or is this something that no matter who they are, they need to be forged to the right path?
No, they're very pure. Babies are considered very, very pure. It's just our conditioning that, in a sense, shall I say, pollutes them. Our forced ideas on them, our interpretation or misinterpretation on the baby. But at the core, they're innocent and very pure.
Okay. That makes sense. So basically, everything you're saying there is within the bounds of classical Islamic thinking. That's helpful.
Yeah, but they need discipline.
Yeah.
They've got to be on what is called the straight path. And what the straight path is, that's the problem.
Yeah.
The interpretation of the straight path. Some will say, if you have to go do it this way. Some will, no, you got this way. No, this is too liberal. No, this is too conservative. So those forces from the environment, that begins to shape that baby as it grows, their thinking of the mind and the heart.
It's interesting.
So the environment is critical.
Yeah. So I think is in the sort of biblical thinking, it's not that the environment is unimportant, but we see, yes, the image of God in people, but this sin nature is basically has made us kind of like rebels by nature, and is always sort of essentially growing us towards rebellion against God, and that's there in every single person. And what's needed there is direct divine intervention to remove this heart of stone, this blind heart, and give us like new eyes, like spiritual eyes. Gotcha. Right? Yeah. You look at what Jesus is talking about. Yes. He's constantly talking about spiritual blindness of especially the religious leaders of his day, who were very much stuck in their godless traditions. Yes. Which in masquerading as godliness. So it's interesting talking to you because I'm sure we can find lots of things to agree on, but there are some fundamental impulses I recognize in your thinking, which I very much agree with. And I think ultimately seeking. Would it be fair to say that you're an advocate of like seeking? That's too easy. Seeking, a higher truth and striving for that, and going deeper than what you're conditioned to hear by the people around you, and actually kind of seeking a personal connection to God, not simply connection to God via proxy by listening to someone else. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes. Well, first of all, in the Quran, it makes it very clear that the nature of a human being, there is nothing sinful there. But there are a lot of sinful or forces that make the person go astray from the outside. And the whole purpose of life is Islam, Islam simply means to surrender to God in peace. But the question is, what are you surrendering? And the Quran suggests what you're surrendering is your attachment to your nafs, to your ego, so that you can bring a heart turned in devotion to God. But in this inner inconvenient work of letting go of the attachment to the ego is a very hard job. It requires a lot of inner work, teachers, environment, noble influences from the outside. We can easily go astray if we don't do that. And this is the commonality, I would say, in all traditions, that at the heart of every tradition is the invitation to really become more Christ-like, Buddha-like, Elohim-like, Allah-like, Krishna-like. But as I keep saying, it's very inconvenient. And a lot of my life is in avoiding that. I would rather get a PhD and tell you how to do that.
Yeah.
Rather than do it myself, you see. So, and that is the biggest problem. All these social injustices that we have today. A large part is, shall I say, what is the main solution? Let me give you a concrete example, if I may. I always mention this. I was in a panel on racism. And this professor in the panel said, every 28 hours, an African American is being killed by state-sponsored violence. We said, wow, really? They said, that's not the real problem. The real problem is the African American is being murdered 1 billion times. B for Bangladesh, or boy. 1 billion times? How? He said, well, by those conditioned biases, prejudices, stereotyping we have about the others. So how do we deal with these social injustice of hate, biases? We've got to overcome these biases. That's a lot of spiritual work. Okay, that's one example. I'm going to give one more example, which is very important these days. Planetary degradation, environment. I love the words of Gus Spaeth, who was the advisor to President Carter, scientific advisor. And his words have become very famous. He said, for 30 years I thought the biggest environmental problems are loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse. And I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could overcome them. But now I've realized the biggest environmental problems are not loss of biodiversity, climate change, ecosystem collapse. The biggest environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy, indifference. And how do you overcome those? Sure, this legislation, that is very powerful, education, powerful. Spiritual practices, spiritual work. Unless we do that spiritual work, it'll be difficult to overcome social injustice or planetary degradation.
So kind of on that note and circling kind of back to a sort of common theme we've been talking about.
Yes.
You talk about being more Christ-like, Christian-like, Buddha-like, Muhammad-like.
Yes.
More like Elohim.
Allah-like, yeah.
So, but to me, my kind of immediate reaction to that is, that's going to vary, like how you define those things is going to vary greatly depending on the source. So right now I'm working on a side-by-side comparison between the life of Jesus from the Qur'an and the life of Jesus from the Bible. And one thing I've been doing in preparation for that is kind of going through all of the like post-New Testament sources, and especially reading something called the Gnostic Gospels.
Right.
And the basic tenet of Gnosticism is that the physical world is evil, and the God who created the physical world is an evil God, and Jesus was an avatar of the true God because he was made of pure light and didn't have a physical body, and therefore he couldn't be crucified because he had no physical body to do that with. So if you take the kind of Jesus from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you have a Jesus who cares very much about the physical world, and he says the meek shall inherit the earth, and he says, I'm not a ghost. A ghost doesn't have flesh and blood that like I have. Whereas the Gnostic Jesus is going to say, no, I have no physical body. The physical reality is evil. So if you believe the physical world is good, then you're absolutely incentivized to take care of environmental issues. If you believe the physical world is bad, well, the sooner it is destroyed, the better, so we can get on with, true spiritual reality. So how is a person supposed to figure out, okay, which Christ to be more like, when there's so many kind of competing versions of Jesus? Or, take your pick, right? There's different visions of Muhammad, there's different visions of Buddha. Like, how are you supposed to kind of work out which version of it you're devoting your life to?
Right. Well, the verse I mentioned earlier, the Quran says, every so way you turn is the face of Allah. Whether it's something celestial, just light-filled, or whether it's what we call the earth, the dirt, they're both the face of Allah. So, for example, Prophet Muhammad, he said, the earth is like your mother. Honor her. Protect her. It is sacred. So, all the different levels of heaven and earth to the Muslim is very sacred because they all come from God.
Do you know where that quote's from?
Which one?
The one you just said, the earth being like your mother.
That's a hadith, famous
Okay.
hadith, yeah. The earth is, the exact words are, Prophet Muhammad said, the earth is like your mother, honor her, protect her.
So this kind of comes back again to, making sure that your, sources about someone are accurate, right?
Oh yeah, this is a very famous hadith actually.
Yeah.
And also the Quran says, you talked about the earth, the Quran says a very powerful statement. The creation of the heavens and the earth is a greater matter than the creation of humanity. But man understands not. Then the Quran says, do not walk proudly on the earth, for you cannot rend the earth asunder, nor can you grow as tall as the mountains in stature. So therefore, the mountains, the hills, the valleys, the flowers, the rivers, they're all very, very sacred.
Yeah. So just trying to piece together your worldview here and try and get the sort of, best explanation of it.
Yes.
So it sounds like, you're trying on one hand to sort of stay tethered to, what's historically accurate about Muhammad, right? It seems like that's actually important to you. It's not just...
Oh, no, of course,
it's not...
yeah.
It doesn't seem like you're someone who wants to just be like, all right, I'll take the things that agree with me and I'll dismiss the rest, which some of your opponents may accuse you of, right?
Right.
So you don't want to be someone who's picking and choosing. You want to be...
No, but I do want to say that a lot of the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, they are fabricated. So Prophet Muhammad himself said that only accept those sayings of mine that are in conformity with the wisdom and the teachings of the Quran. So I follow that.
Okay. So you believe in... So you believe that there's kind of no errors in the Quran. It's all kind of word for word.
No, I don't. It's not a question of errors. Everything is subject to interpretation.
Yeah.
And interpretation is a reflection of a person's level of maturity, spiritual maturity, and intention.
Sure. So you think the Quran itself is perfect, but then it comes to you through this filter of human cultures and tradition, and that's what you kind of have to be careful of?
I would say every holy book is very sacred. And I come back to the same point that it's all a question of interpretation. Whether it's perfect, the reason I hesitate on the word perfect is because some of the collection of that has been done by humans.
Mm-hmm.
The revelations might be perfect, but the collection might be imperfect. For example, it's interesting that some Muslims say that the penalty for adultery is death.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such verse in the Quran. Quite the opposite, actually. There's no verse in the Quran that says the penalty for adultery is death. So why would you say that? Then some of these famous jurists say, no, actually, it was a revelation that was written, it was put under the bed of one of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad, and a goat ate it up.
Uh-huh.
You see? So that's why I'm saying that...
And Omar himself actually said that if I could have put stoning for adultery in the Quran, I would have.
Yes, but it's not there in the Quran. But some people say it is there, but it was eaten by a goat or something happened. So that is why I say that, to me, every holy book is subject to human interpretation. It was Gandhi who said every holy book has truths and untruths. And when some people got excited, he said, no, I'm not saying that verses are not divine. The verses might be divine, but the human understanding, the human mind is less than divine. So the human understanding of that verse can be less than perfect.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So then, but then I suppose what then you have to figure out as you read a. And by the way, do you for your kind of interaction with the Quran?
Yes.
Do you prefer reading in English and Arabic? Like how do you?
I read in Arabic. I also love to read it in English, all the different translations, and I love to see how they interpret it. So I realize as I read the English translations, and my Arabic is not that good, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Me neither.
But I've lived in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and I used to know Arabic very well when I was young. But now in my old age, I've forgotten a lot of it.
Right. And ordering food from the market in Egypt is very different than reciting the Quran, right?
yeah. So I look at the different English translations, and I get a sense of it. And for me, I ask myself sincerely, how does that, as Rumi says, splash in my heart? And does it serve the common good? And by the way, the Quran says some verses are literal, some verses are metaphorical. But it doesn't say which ones are which.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a human judgment. That's one point. The other point, which I talk about a lot, I work with a rabbi and a pastor. We are called the Interfaith Amigos,
mm-hmm.
and we travel the country. And there's one point we make which gives us a lot of invitations. We say every holy book has two kinds of verses: particular and universal. Particular verses are in desperate need of historical and textual context. Universal verses are timeless, placeless, and filled with wisdom. The problem is, if I take a particular verse and advocate that as a universal verse, or if I want to harm somebody, I will take a particular verse from your holy book and compare that to a beautiful universal verse from my holy book. That's an unfair comparison.
Yeah. Right. It's fairly easy to do. People ask me all the time if I take the Bible literally.
Uh-huh.
My answer to that is, of course, there's metaphorical parts. All the parts you think are crazy, though, I take literally. But I think having read the Quran,
uh-huh.
I actually think that, like, I know people take the Quran out of context.
Mm.
Like people do it in the West, people do it in the Muslim world.
Yes.
I think you have a harder time in some ways because of the type of literature the Quran is, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a sonar revelation. It's meant to be heard.
Right.
Yeah.
So like the way the Bible is written, because it's written has this sort of grand narrative,
uh-huh.
it's a little easier to figure out
Yes.
the context.
Yes.
Whereas I think the Muslim trying to find the context of, say, Surah Al-Fil,
Uh-huh.
has a lot more sort of like digging to do of like, okay, what is this referring to?
Yeah, the historical context of it, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
there's a lot of work to do. So
Yes.
because there's a lot of work to do,
Yes.
I think there is this window of opportunity for people to kind of make it very convenient for themselves,
Right.
in some ways.
And also, let's be very honest. Every holy book has difficult verses.
Yeah.
So there's no point in me posturing and making all these different acrobatic movements to prove this is correct, this is that, it is good. They're difficult. And I have to acknowledge it. I have to admit that. Maybe it's beyond my understanding. But yes, are there difficult verses in the Quran? Absolutely, the difficult verses in the Quran. And if I ask somebody who studied the Torah or the Christian scriptures or the Hindu sutras, Buddhist sutras, they say the same thing.
Well, actually, so 2 Peter, when talking about Paul the Apostle,
Uh-huh.
he says, also consider what our beloved brother Paul has written to you.
Uh-huh.
There are some things in his letters
Uh-huh.
which are difficult to understand,
Right.
which the ignorant and the unstable twist to
Yeah.
their own destruction, right, as they do the other scriptures. So yeah, for sure, anything, and I think, and this kind of, we keep coming back to this point, but like the danger is, right, if you want to go in and find what you want to find,
Right,
you can find what you want to find. And that's why it's so dangerous,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. And by there's another point I want to make about difficult verses in every holy book. There's a joke that, I wish I could use whiteout, or I wish I could engage in holy amnesia. And this is what a lot of us are doing with these difficult verses. The simple answer is, yes, there are difficult verses. Let's acknowledge it.
Yeah. I think, personally, when I read the Bible, and as I interact with people who do, the difficult verses of history and kind of timeline and stuff are mostly just an excuse to avoid the actually difficult verses where we're told to do things like love your enemies.
yes.
Because it's like, I have a friend from Pakistan. He says that's his favorite and least favorite part of the Bible. And it's like, love your enemies, that's beautiful. But anytime there's an actual enemy you have to love, it's like, I wish this was not here.
That's right. Inconvenient. Yes. There's a verse in the Qur'an similar to that. It says, repel evil with something which is better, so that your enemy becomes your intimate bosom friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to say, but very difficult to acknowledge and to practice. It requires a higher level of consciousness. But it also means that the Quran is saying, God is saying, or what Spirit is saying, that we human beings are eventually capable of that. But we have to evolve into that higher state.
So on that, right? We both acknowledge the danger of. Again, I'm not trying to do a gotcha question here. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of your thinking, and
yes.
I know what the kind of questions my listeners asking. It's my question too.
Yeah.
But we both acknowledge the danger of you going to sacred texts and just kind of finding what you want to find. Right?
Exactly.
People do it all the time.
Yes.
So the question becomes, how do you know you're not doing that?
Mm-hmm. If a particular verse gives you hope, gives you vision, room for creativity, for doing good to others, I feel it's real. But if it doesn't do that, doesn't give me hope, doesn't give me a sense of vision, doesn't give me a sense of creativity, a sense of serving the common good, but it tells me to hate the other because that person is outside my tribe, then I know something is wrong in my understanding of that verse. See, if my relationship with my holy book comes in the way of my relationship with you, you could be the most conservative or Christian, whatever you might be Islamophobic, but if my relationship with my holy book comes in the way of my relationship with you, the Sufis will say, it'll definitely come in the way of my relationship with God. Because we're both human beings, we both have the divine spark in us, regardless of culture, religion, race, etc.
1 John says, whoever does not love his brother who he sees cannot love God who he does not see. Which is basically the same.
Yes,
the same principle
yes,
there.
Yes.
Right?
So what you've been telling me then, James, is in terms of human values, principles, it's the same. Be more Christ-like. Do good to the other. Love your enemy. The problem is it's difficult. So we make all kinds of excuses. The other part we have not touched upon is, getting too absorbed in theology. Was it Ishmael? Was it Isaac? Sarah? Hagar? The last of the prophets? No prophets after that? These are all theological questions. And they're important. But I like the insight of Rumi. Rumi says, Jamal, don't get too enmeshed in all these subtle, intricate theological questions. He said, doing that, you're like a bird that ties a snare around its leg and unties it. Makes it even more complex than not unties it. Makes it even more complex and unties it to show off its strange skill, forgetting the point is to escape, to enjoy the freedom of that beautiful sky as you sail around, the freshness of the meadows.
So I think I both disagree and agree with that statement.
Right. Yes.
In that I think that what your theology is matters immensely
yes.
here, right? So if you if your theology teaches you that you have a God that wants to sort of like constrain you, or to teach you that this world is not important, and to sort of distance yourself from it, right? It leads to a very different outcome than if your theology leads you to actually having a proper understanding of how God wants you to treat people, right?
Yeah.
So, like a proper application of Christian theology, yeah, sure, is going to have a moral code to it, right? It's going to have, but even the moral code itself, Jesus says, can all be summed up by, loving God and loving your neighbor. Right. So I really believe that if you have a proper understanding of God, then you will interact properly in the world, right? But if you get, and so it's not so much of too much theology. The actual danger is like false theology and false ideas about God. One thing the Bible says about idolatry, in the Psalms, David writes, idols have eyes but cannot see, they have ears but do not hear, they have hearts but do not feel, and those who worship them become like them. So the Bible has this principle of you become like what you worship. Right. So if you think God is, surly and, not on your side and waiting to kind of like, blow off the handle at everything, right, and imposes all these arbitrary rules on you just cause, then that's what you become like. Right. Whereas if you believe God is generous and kind and genuinely loves you, that's what you become like.
Right. I think I misspoke when I said theology. By theology, I mean those minute theological beliefs, like was it Ishmael or was it Isaac? Was it Sarah or was it Hagar? And for Islam, for example, Muhammad is the last of the prophets, and anybody else coming after that, I can hate, or I'm justified in committing violence against that person. I'm talking about those theological specific beliefs rather than understanding of God or of nature. Those disputations, was it this or was it that, fighting over that, for me is problematic. But in terms of morals, no, I if your belief in God is certain kind, that's great. That's your belief. That's wonderful. But no, if it was not Isaac, but it was Ishmael who was being sacrificed by Abraham, and I will fight you on that. That to me is an unnecessary disputation.
Oh, and the funny thing is, like I always kind of assumed that was in the Quran. But it's not. It's not. That's something that's kind of like comes up later and then is like imposed back onto the sources.
Right. And there's nothing in the Quran about that. No.
So Al-Tabari lists 5 hadith saying Ishmael, 5 saying Isaac, and says, no, it makes more sense that it's Isaac. So it's not like a monolithic Muslim position.
Right.
Well, I think we've about used up our time.
Thank you. But thank you for your knowledge. My God, you've studied so much. I'm deeply impressed. Wow.
Thank you. A really, really engaging conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. We'll have to do some, when I think of more sort of shows on these sort of topics, I'd love to have you again.